Ein paar Worte dazu, worum es eigentlich geht. Sie haben ein bisschen was von Denis Scheck schon erfahren. Der zweite Roman, 60 Kilo Kinnhaken, der klangvolle Name, steigt 3 Jahre nach dem ersten Roman ein. Wir folgen hier Gestur, einem jungen Mann, der ca. 18 Jahre alt ist, also noch sehr jung. Das Ganze spielt im fiktiven kleinen Ort Segulfjörður. Wir werden nachher noch kurz drüber reden. Und dieses kleine Örtchen, wie gerade schon angeklungen, erlebt einen wahnsinnigen Aufschwung Anfang des 20. Jahrhunderts. Schuld sind die Heringe, wie an so vielem in Island. Denn eben mit den Norwegern kam tatsächlich das silberne Gold nach Island und damit gab es wahnsinnige und sehr, sehr schnelle Veränderungen. Auch für den jungen Waisen Gestur, dem wir nun folgen werden, der mittlerweile eben volljährig ist, den wir schon im ersten Roman kennengelernt haben und der sich kopfüber in diese neue Welt stürzt mit ihren ungeahnten Möglichkeiten. Doch das Schicksal holt natürlich zu mehreren Kinnhaken aus. Welche das sein werden wir in den nächsten, ich würde sagen, so ca. 60 bis 75 Minuten ein bisschen streifen. 60 Kilo Kinnhaken, Sie haben es vorhin auch schon gehört, wurde tatsächlich auch mit dem Preis für den besten Roman des Jahres in Island ausgezeichnet. Und bevor wir reden, before we start, I think we're going to hear a little bit in Icelandic from you so that all of you also get a little bit of an impression what it sounds like in its original language.
Yes, I'm just going to read the beginning of the book here. You have another. I started at page 100. So it's chapter 1. Milli binda myrkur, á milli binda ríkir myrkur, eitt sótsvart og rollkalt ramm íslenskt myrkur. Og ekki með öllu þögult því vindurinn æðir það, norðan vindur hryðju blautur og lemur á því litla heimskauta þorpi sem við höfum komið okkur upp í fyrra verki. Íshafsvindurinn gengur óhindrað inn fjörðinn og lætur höggin dynja á þökum og gluggum þorpsins siglum og rám með slyddu rosa sínum svo enginn bátur fær kyrra legu á laginu. Haustrokan feykir einnig sérhverjum lesfugli fyrir kirkjuturn og kirkjugafl þar sem hann nýtur þess að svamla í myrkrinu því lesandanum líður best í prentsvertu. Hann kemur þó auga á týruljós í glugga og spyr sig og höfundurinn hver þar vaki. Höfundurinn sem ætíð rugla í eigin verki, sjálfséð en allsjáandi, situr stóreigur á kirkjugarðsvegg og svarar því til að þarna vaki prestsmaddamann gamla, drottning Fjarðar á efri hæð í Maddumuhúsi. Sú hefur lifað alla söguna, komin á 100. og annað aldursár og heldur því alla daga lífsins jól, lætur allar nætur loga á sínum lampa. Að öðru leyti þorpið logalaust þessa septembernótt. Og í því svart nætti liggur okkar drengur, Gestur, í litla þúfulaga strandarbænum þurrabúðinni sem stendur á norðurströnd eyrarinnar og því fyrsti gaflinn sem norðanáttin mætir. Gestur sefur í myrkrinu, með höfuðið fullt af myrkri og í því myrkri spinnast draumar. Þar snýst sjálft draumahjólið og mararholt í kafi. Á því mikla mylluhjóli hangir faðir hans eilífur og sýpur kveljur. Birtst sjóblautur úr kafi en hverfur svo aftur án afláts. Brimrótið ógurlegt.
Thank you very much.
Actually, my book is the beginning is describing a very wet September night in Iceland, and the book is quite wet also because we and Tom walked from the hotel over here. Heavy rain, so it's quite fitting.
Your book right now is called, in English, it's 60 Kilos of Knockouts, I think. Yeah. So from sunshine to knockouts, it sounds like it's going from a very optimistic tone to a much less optimistic tone. Why on earth does this one sound not as positive as the first volume, or does it?
It's a period of knockouts because it was the Wild West. When the Norwegians came to Iceland in 1903, they brought with them, you know, a lot of sailors, and those were young guys, and they drank very, very much. And every Saturday night there was like a fist fight in the streets of this small town. And the Icelanders had never seen this before, so it was a new thing for them. People fighting like they enjoyed it, or like it was their form of having fun. So fighting in the streets, fighting other drunk sailors, and we didn't understand it. And so that's where the title comes from. This is a period, the Norwegian period in our history, between like 1903 to 1918 or something. So that's when the Norwegians had all the boats and the herring industry. They came to Iceland and they made a lot of money, but in the meantime they taught us about how we could also make money out of this fish that we didn't really believe. We didn't even eat it, even though we were starving, and the fjord was filled with herring. They had no idea. They just like looked down on it and thought it was only fit for animal.
But did the Icelandic people get used to it pretty quickly, especially to the fighting and everything that
came with it? Yeah, they learned fighting as well, and so it was a crazy period where there was maybe 10,000 drunken sailors in this little town, and only one policeman, and of course everything was illegal. This was a time when alcohol was banned in Iceland, but still there were 23 bars in this small town. So when I was doing research, I came across everything like this, and so I used it in my book, and it was a surprise to me even, you know, I didn't know it was so wild. And then people spoke of some brothels, and we always believed that there never was prostitution in Iceland, so that was also a thing there, and so yeah, mostly wild life, wild sex, wild fighting, and wild drinking, so this was the period.
In this first little chapter that you just read, I think at some point you mentioned that the author is a little bit like an owl, like this. It's an animal, a bird that stands for most of the time, like also in mythical sagas and mythical stories, it stands for intelligence, for wisdom. Was that like a very deliberate thing you did, because it gives you the opportunity also to see things from above as an author?
Yeah, it was just a natural thought came to me, because I have a summer house up north in a small island close to this town, and so the atmosphere of the north is a little different from the south in Iceland. So the nights are even brighter up north, and there's a different kind of light, and there's just atmosphere is different. And one part of this atmosphere is the owl that we have up north. And in my island, I only saw it once, and it was quite close. It was like 5 meters away. I was just looking in the forest, and I saw an owl, and it's like 2 meter wide wings, you know. And for me, it was like seeing God, you know. It was like amazing, and those big eyes. And so maybe because of that, I put the author as an owl there, because I was just. In the beginning of the first volume, I'm talking about literature. I'm talking about the blank page as a empty field of white snow, you know, and then the character comes walking onto the page. And I'm talking. It's like metafiction in a way. That I'm talking about the reader also in the beginning of the first book, and the author, and then my editor told me you have to do a similar kind of beginning. Has to be great like the first one. And it was a challenge. It was so I'm talking about darkness here. Everything is dark. But the letters on the page are darkness and something like that. You know, and talking about the author, talking about the reader, and the reader was suddenly a bird flying around the town, and oh, there's a light in one window, and asking why is there a light in this window, and then the reader's asking the author. And then the author became an owl. And this is only like for 2 pages. The owl only appears again one time in the book. So.
Yes, I tried to count, and I only found it another time.
Yeah, I didn't want to. It shouldn't be such a heavy burden.
Yeah.
It was just like a small poetic thing.
Yeah. And you once said, I don't know if you still see it like that, but I found like in an interview for I think 60 Kilos of Sunshine, you said with that book you kind of like entered your tragedy phase or your tragedy writing. Would you still stand by that, or is it not so much a tragedy anymore?
Yeah, there are all kinds of tragedies also in this book.
Yeah.
I mean, and the third volume as well it's a hard life, you know, and people were dying much more back then. Children were dying, and so it was very tragic times also. But still, people were living and they had fun and they were drinking, and so I tried to combine it all. And of course, I started out mostly as a comic writer, like in 101 Reykjavik is totally comic in a way. But when I was writing that, I remember it cannot only be comic. You have to have like some heavy, some weight in it. So it has to go deeper than that, you know. So the main character becomes a little bit tragic in the end. So I always think about it and I try to blend it, and I think I learned it from the theater. I translated Shakespeare, and he was always making jokes even though people are killing each other, and then just after the killing he doesn't come to dinner because he's being eaten now by you know, it's from Hamlet, you know. It's crazy humor, but very tragic at the same time. So I thought it was an interesting mix, because I don't so much believe in he is a comic writer and she is a drama writer. Like in the old video rentals, you had drama, comedies, romantic, action. Life is not like that. You know? It's a blend.
When we talk about tragedy or non-tragedy, I think it's time to talk a little bit about Gestur, the protagonist in this novel. He already appeared in the first volume. I think we leave him when he's about 15 in the first novel, and I think he's kind of like losing a lot of his family and a lot of people he loves in a huge avalanche that comes down. So we meet him again 3 years later now. He's living in a little hut now in the earth, more or less, with, let's say, a weird amalgamate of people, a very big mixture of people, really old ones, really young ones. It's not really clear in what relationship they are to each other. I think they sometimes don't even know themselves if they're kind of like related or not. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about this Gestur? Who is he and what drives him? What is happening to this young guy? What does he want to accomplish, actually?
So I wanted him to carry the dreams of the Icelandic people. So he's like, his dream is to become a little bit. His dream is to bring himself out of poverty and out of this turf hut and get a proper house and a proper life. And he's been struggling all his life. And his father died when he was 2 years old, and then he was put up with a rich merchant, and then the woman of the wife of the merchant thought this was an illegitimate son of the merchant, and so they were always fighting about it. So in the end he was thrown away from that home, 10 years old, to a very poor house in this fjord where the main action takes place. And so he grows up, he sees both sides of life, the rich one and the poor one, but in the end he is poor, and then he loses this new family, half of it in an avalanche. So at the beginning of this book, he is the breadwinner of the family, so he has to carry all those people on his back. So that's why he's trying to think, how can I do it? And when some Norwegians offer to buy the old farm, and he wants to sell them, and so this is his mission, to try to bring the family out of this hole in the ground and get a proper house. And that's a big burden on him and a big responsibility. He's only 18 at the beginning of this book, and at the same time he's a very strange family, as you say. He has a foster father and and a son of the foster father that he has become father of, sort of. And then there is this lady who takes care of the kitchen, and they are not related. And I think I'm inspired by my own family in a way, because I was twice divorced, and I have 4 kids with 3 women and 1 man, because the father of my son is German, so my son is German, but I brought him up, so he calls me dad. So now I'm with a new wife since 10 years, but we have a child on our own, and then I have 2 children with 2 other wives, and then 1 daughter who is like 14 years old. So it's my only thought was like, we're not like a family, we're like a rock band in a way. So each one has his role, one is on the drums and one is a singer, and somehow we fit together, but not everyone is related. So that's why maybe the idea came from, and Gestur is, I lent him a lot from my own experience, so part of him is like me in a way.
Yeah. Do you think this is, I don't know if this is true, talking to a few Icelandic friends of mine, is it because I just thought about this, maybe there's more kinship than family ties sometimes, and that it's very different from here, that people also get children when they're really young in Iceland, or that it's not like such a big deal, or if you are with someone and then to split up, like here it's always like this till death do us parts thing still, but it's not like that in Iceland. Is that true? Or
it's a very loose, family ties are very loose in Iceland.
Yeah.
And many children, maybe 30–40% of the children they have two fathers and 2 mothers, and then like some have 6 sets of grandparents. So everybody is together in it. So, and that's maybe our heritage from the living inside this turf huts, where it was so cold. We didn't have any woods to cut for fire, so we didn't have any fire. Only fire was in the kitchen, and the kitchen was sort of far away from the living room because it had to be there because it was so much smoke, and so the living room was filled with people, and the people together created the heating of the room. So this is called baðstofa, a very strange word. Baðstofa, something like that. And so we lived in that for centuries, for maybe 6–7 centuries. And the only heating was from our bodies, and so people tended to have big farms. They were better, 20 people in the same room was considered good, because then there was more warmth. And how is it to live all together in one room for like 600 years? It must create a special kind of tradition, or it must make us into a little bit different people than the rest of the world. So we are very liberal, we are very open towards gay, and Gay Pride is the biggest festival in Iceland, so we have embraced that once it came to Iceland, and so we pride ourselves to be liberal and open-minded, and if there is a new child, for example, the daughter of my brother, she met someone and they form a family, and the father has another child from another relationship, and automatically that child is brought into the family. So maybe 1/3 of the kids in our family are not related to us. So that's pretty normal, I think, in Iceland. And it comes from this tradition of everybody's crouched together and nobody knows who's related to each other, and so it creates a very special kind of culture that for example, when you get married, the wedding night, you have to spend the wedding night in the same room as your grandfather and grandmother and your father and everybody.
I think that is a very good gateway to our first passage that we're going to hear. Maybe to give you a little bit of context, because it's like we're starting at page 124 or something like this. What happens before that is Segulfjörður has become like a magnet already for herring sea people from Norway, from Denmark. There are a lot of entrepreneurs there, and with those people does come also a lot of stuff, and not only how to do herring.
So always a little bit guilty feeling, but of course also a big joy. I just created that scene because I wanted to show how the 20th century collided with this backward society, and to put them together.
Yeah, I like that line. It was like this was the man of the 19th century, to have him as like the symbol for everything that is already not modern anymore.
And later, when they go on to take the car down, the roof will break, and that's the first traffic accident in Iceland because there is an old lady lying down, and the car like boom. So, but she doesn't die, but you know.
Is that one of your inventions, or do you? I figure you researched a lot for this book.
Yeah, but it's an invention, but it's sort of based on my great grandmother, because she was the first woman to die in a car accident actually in Reykjavik. So it was very. I read about her life, and then it was so absurd that she would die in a car accident, because she was totally from the 19th century and there were no cars. She had never seen a car in her life, and then to finish your life like that, and it was so absurd. So maybe it influenced this. That's why I got the idea. You never know.
Yeah. In this chapter, I also like how this Danish guy is like coming to land and like walking onto Iceland, and bringing all the stuff with him that obviously in Iceland that has never anyone seen before. I was wondering, because I thought like there is a very long connection that Denmark and Norway and all of these countries have with Iceland, but still in this chapter it's very obvious that they don't know anything about each other actually, because he's so irritated by everything. The Icelanders are completely irritated by what he does. So in your opinion and also in research, what was actually the relationship between Denmark, Norway and Iceland, and is it very different now, or is there still like a certain vibe that's still there from back then?
Of course, we were tired of the Danes, because they have been our colonists. Well, it was never a total colony. It was like a part of Denmark, but well, 5 years ago they did a big series on Danish TV about the history of Denmark. It was like 8 episodes, 1 hour long each, so 8 hours of Danish history, and they mentioned Iceland for 2 seconds. So we were never really a part of their history. So that was a big blow to us to see that. But so some people in Iceland hated the Danes, some were irritated by them, and then there were ones who loved them as the masters. There was always a part of the population who loved the masters. And in my books and in my research, I found out we loved the Norwegians when they came, because they brought action, they changed the society. But Danes were not so popular because Danes are really invisible. They don't appear in the research I did. They didn't do anything. So one character in this book says, that the Norwegians did more for Iceland in 6 years than the Danes did for 600 years. So in a way it's true, because they didn't build anything up, they didn't build infrastructure, they only served us food. You know, the merchants came in the spring with the ship, so they brought goods from necessary goods for like wheat and all those stuff to bake bread. And we didn't have that in Iceland, so we needed them. But they took our fish and our wool instead, so it was like a stagnation for many centuries. We didn't make any fortskritt.
So the progress actually came with the Norwegians, and mostly centered around the whole herring thing. So I wondered if that all came with the Norwegians, and I think you mentioned something like this before when in the beginning of our talk, of our conversation, that in Iceland no one saw, for example, herring as something that could have an impact on progress. Do you have a theory, or is there like a common thing why in Iceland people never thought of that, why that had to be brought in by the Norwegians? Or did they not have the capacity at that time?
No, a combination of many things, also ignorance and just being backwards. And people didn't read newspapers from abroad, or they didn't know what was happening in the world. They just read their own literature that had been going on for 1,000 years, and so we were very isolated and so full of prejudices, and we only ate this kind of fish because we always done that, you know, we're not going to change that. And so many things were just taken for granted, and people didn't really think. For example, there is a surprise when the Norwegians come to Iceland and they see that the Icelanders don't even know how to fish whales, you know, because whale is a huge piece of meat, but we didn't know how to fish them. But we had developed a really good, strong rules about what happened if a whale would die on the coast. Then this farm would get the tail, this farm would get the fins, and this would, you know, we would cut up the meat and divide it to all the farms, and we call it kvalreki. It's like like a whale rack or something, and that's a very big word in Icelandic. So it was a big lottery winning for us when some whale came ashore. So it was many things like that, you know. The Norwegians were kind of surprised. They don't know how to do anything. But in a way, it was also, we couldn't build ships. All the forests were dead and gone, and so we had used up all the trees. So we couldn't build any good ships. We only could build small boats.
I read, I don't know, I think it's been for a few years now that in like this real little village that you kind of like base your story on. You mentioned greed a lot in your book about like hubris and kind of like wanting too much, and I think this whole like fishing for herring ended very abruptly, I think in the 60s, sometime in the 60s, and then this little town fell apart pretty quickly because just the wealth was gone. But there's now someone from Iceland who came back actually and brought back like a lot of money because he's been a really successful businessman. Is it easier accept if it's one of your own? If someone comes back and says, I'll do something for you?
Yeah, he's like the son of the village, and he made some money in farm fishing, salmon farming in Arizona and Croatia. So he came back with a lot of money and invested and built some restaurants, and he built some science company, and so he lifted the whole community on his own. So he brought a lot of money. And then also it collided with the making of a tunnel that you can now travel to another fjord, nearby fjord. So everything fell together, and suddenly there was a boom, and this town is now very popular. And then also the books are helping, so many tourists come there, and they have this great herring museum. So it's a town that lives on past, you know, fame, you know, a fame that is gone. Yeah. So, but they try to create something new out of it.